Okay, hello everyone. I think we're going to get started. Welcome to today's session. My name is Kenneth Boddy. I am going to be facilitating this meeting today. I'm a member of the staff team here at the National Police Federation, and we're glad to have you with us this evening. Just before we get started, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. While we're meeting on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land in which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving our relationships between nations and improving an understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. And we acknowledge that we're on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So the sessions today will be led by our members of our board of directors here at the National Police Federation, Michelle Boutin, Kevin Halwa, and Jeff McGowan. They will all introduce themselves, but I'd like to start with some housekeeping. So for the Q&A today, we're going to try and keep things organized and have two organized Q&A sessions in today's presentation, one partway through the presentation and one closer towards the end. In order to keep things moving during our first Q&A, we're actually going to keep it to written questions that I'll read out loud to our board. And during our second Q&A, at the end of the call, we'll have written questions, but we'll also go to our audience, which you can, when we get to that section, you can use the raise hand function and we can call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. So at the bottom of your screen, you can see a Q&A button. If you click that button, you will be able to open up the Q&A and type some written questions. And then, as I mentioned at the end, you can also use the raise hand function and we'll unmute you. I'll provide a reminder of both of those options once we get to the Q&A sections. We also wanted to mention that while there's a lot of information in today's presentation, we also have some additional resources that can be found on our website, which is KeepAlbertaRCMP.ca. And just prior to this meeting, we also shared with you two reference documents, which we think will be useful. The first is a side-by-side comparison of the current RCMP model and the proposed Alberta Provincial Police Service. The second document is frequently asked questions. And then finally, as you heard today, that we will be recording today's session with the hope that we're going to be able to share it at a later date. We will not be using any of the Q&A sessions from this webinar in that recording. We'll just be recording the presentation to share live with everyone. So you don't need to, but if you are still concerned about anonymity or if you have any of those concerns, please feel free to let us know via email or through the chat. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our board of directors. And I think Michelle is going to get us kicked off.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a busy weeknight. We really appreciate your attendance here. For those of you who are not familiar with who we are, we're the National Police Federation. So we are the union for nearly 20,000 RCMP members across the country. And our role is to provide strong and fair and progressive representation for RCMP members across the country. So I want to give a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues as well. My name is Michelle Boutin. I'm a vice president with the National Police Federation, and I'm a 20-year staff sergeant with the RCMP. All of my service has been here in Alberta in a variety of different locations, as well as different roles. My husband is also an RCMP member, also a staff sergeant here. He's born and raised in Alberta, and we currently live just a little west of Stony Plain in the village of Spring Lake. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jeff McGowan, to introduce himself.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. As Michelle said, my name is Jeff McGowan. I joined the force in 1994. Served in Alberta and in the Yukon, and then came back to Alberta. General duty, emergency response team, federal drug section, alert with the gang unit, the SRR program. It's been good, and I live in Stony Plain, kind of near Michelle, just west of Edmonton. Kevin?
My name is Kevin Hull. I'm also one of the directors of the National Police Federation. Born and raised in Alberta, Grand Prairie originally, and dialing in this evening from my home in Sylvan Lake. 25-year member of the RCMP, a staff sergeant, and thank you for joining us. As you may guess, being a lifetime Albertan, anything that's Albertan is I'm very passionate about. When I travel internationally, I always tell, when people ask where I'm from, I always say I'm from Alberta. And then depending on where I am in the world, I sometimes may have to explain to them that Alberta is actually part of Canada. So when things like this, a discussion about possible move from the RCMP towards a provincial police service and the risks and costs that will potentially cost that the taxpayers of Alberta, I obviously get very concerned about and very passionate about. So thank you for taking part of your evening out to join us and learn a little bit more about the topic. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So the reason we're here is because our members who serve here in Alberta are truly Albertans at heart. They want to be here, and we want to help keep that a reality for them. So we'll go through with the presentation and start with the structure of today's session. So what will tonight look like? What we're going to do is present on some key items within the Alberta Provincial Police Transition Study Report, and we're going to cross-compare some of those things to the current Alberta RCMP and discuss what some of those proposed changes might mean. As we mentioned, there will be opportunities for questions as we move through the presentation. So the purpose of our engagement and why we're here today. We're here to inform Albertans on key aspects of the Transition Study Report. As we've been coming to learn, as we do these town halls, we're seeing that many Albertans are still unaware of the proposed transition and what this might mean for them. And so we're here to get out some of the facts and equip you with the knowledge and questions to ask your MLAs or elected officials. We'll also be trying to answer any questions that you might have. And we also want to gather feedback from all of you regarding the current state of policing, the proposed models, and any local policing perspectives you'd like to share. Our intention is to prepare that in a report and provide that to the government and the province this spring. Of note, and I think it's important that we cover off that we're not here to answer for the government or represent them. And we're also not here to represent the RCMP as an organization. While we're happy to be able to provide some information that's been shared with us and that we've learned through the Fair Deal panel and the transition studies themselves, we are unable to answer for the RCMP as an organization, but we will answer any questions that we can, and we'll certainly provide you the correct point of contact for questions that we can. So we'll go through a bit of the agenda here. As you can read on the screen, we'll first discuss what the situation is, as some of you may not be familiar with that. We're going to look at the situation today, what Albertans are saying about the RCMP, as well as an overview of the current state of policing. And then we'll go through the proposed transition study, what it means for police and governance, staffing levels, training, and annual costs to taxpayers. And then we'll look at some final steps or next steps that you Albertans, we Albertans will be able to take. So what is happening? How did we get here? So as many of you may already know, in 2020, the Fair Deal panel recommended that Alberta consider transitioning away from the RCMP to a provincial police service. And as part of their 15 recommendations to improve Alberta's standing in Confederation. Their results from their survey and the feedback that they received ranked a change to policing, consideration for provincial police service, ranking that second to last out of the 15 priorities, with only 34% of support. In October 2020, Alberta then commissioned the transition study and hired PricewaterhouseCoopers to do so. The study was completed in April 2021 and was made public later the same year in November. So right now, what we're doing is touring the province to hear from Albertans. We don't think that the public and members of the communities that are served by the RCMP have been engaged enough. We want to hear from Albertans, listen to what their thoughts and concerns are, and report that back to the government. So what we've heard so far, so since December 2020, the NPF has conducted our own rounds of public opinion polling through Polaris Strategic Insights. And over the past year, the results from that polling have remained relatively unchanged for the most part, showing that 80% of Albertans who are policed by the RCMP are satisfied. 84% support keeping the RCMP. And what it did show was that Albertans would rather see more resources provided to the RCMP to decrease rural response times and combat opioids, that over putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a new police service. So since that time and over the past year and a half, the NPF, the three of us, including our president, Brian Sauvé, have been actively meeting with Albertans, stakeholders, and elected officials, all of whom have shared the same sentiments. We've participated in the RMA and AMA conferences, and we've spoke with many mayors, councillors, and MLAs. Now, here in January and throughout April 2022, we will be hosting public in-person and virtual sessions like this one to hear from you firsthand and prepare a report back to the government. Let's move on to the current state of policing. So how does the RCMP operate today? So as many of you may be aware, the RCMP has been the police service of choice here in Alberta since 1932. Albertans receive a combination of the highest standards of policing. We have 3,500 RCMP members here in Alberta. They serve 113 detachments and over 300 municipalities and 22 First Nations communities. And they respond to over 800,000 calls for service each and every year. You may have heard the term cop to pop. It's not a popular term with us because we don't really call ourselves cops, but it is catchy. When comparing the cop to pop ratio, this is a police officer, the number of police officers for a percentage of population. The RCMP police more Albertans than our municipal partners. For example, one police officer in our partners with Calgary or Edmonton police an average of 574 people, whereas RCMP members police an average of 589. They do this over vast geographical areas, covering more people. And of course, as you can imagine, that creates greater challenges. We have certain postings that create additional challenges for the members that police northern policing areas, fly in communities. And as you can imagine, this increases staffing challenges and complexities. Officers can't stay in isolation for many years or throughout an entire career and need to be rotated out. Considerations like government housing. None of these things were costed out in the transition study, and we think that that's something that needs to be addressed. So, community policing. We'll speak a little bit about this. The Alberta RCMP prides itself on the relationships that it's built within the communities that they serve and they live in. The Alberta RCMP's specialized policing functions is a focus on community policing. So right now, the Alberta RCMP model consists of over 20,000 volunteers across the province, and they do their work in a variety of different programs, a few as you can see on your screen, including Rural Crime Watch and Victim Services Units. I can tell you, and for anybody that's on the call that's done any work for Victim Services and Rural Crime Watches, they're gainfully employed and there's no shortage of work. The minister himself has said that a provincial police service will simply replicate the community policing programs that the RCMP has. And to be frank, I find that a bit insulting. And I think it's offensive to the partnerships that we've created and the volunteers who serve in these groups. It has taken many, many years to develop the rapport and build out the relationships that are so necessary to having these programs run effectively. For anyone to assume that they could simply be replicated overnight, I think is a bit offensive. So I just want to acknowledge the groups and the volunteers that do partner with the RCMP, and to the members that work in those partnerships. We understand that the work that you have done has taken years to get there, and it's I think it's very much appreciated in the communities that we serve. Jeff, do you want to start here? Thanks.
So in the current state, you can see some of the costings that have been written out. Effectively, Albertans benefit significantly from having the RCMP as the police service of choice. And it's a training issue, but also in the costs. We see basically 30% cost sharing with the federal government. And this way, the taxpayers don't have to end up forking out that money. This, of course, would disappear should the RCMP be removed as the provincial police service. We have to be, it's one of the benefits that we often cite is our ability to pool the resources that we have. We can draw upon neighboring divisions in the event of a Fort McMurray fire, Slave Lake fire, High River flood or something, where you need to quickly move people into an area to deal with some sort of disaster, I guess is the best word. It's effective because of the interoperability, and we can throw a lot of resources at whatever issue we're dealing with. So when we're looking at non-billable costs, these are costs that are not necessarily accounted for within the current budget. You can see that civil litigation, claim settlements, your external review committee for grievances and public complaints, none of that is charged back to the province. The agreements on the municipal police services side and the municipality side, we've got emergency response teams, the OCC, your major crimes unit, your PD or dog section, air services. A lot of these things, not only do they cost a lot for manpower, but you're looking at equipment and gear and training, especially when you're dealing with things like the emergency response team. That we have 3 armored vehicles in the province that run, at the time when we bought it, about $685,000 a piece. These things are still going to need to be accounted for and provided, because you cannot have a provincial police service or anybody policing the rural area without having that ability or that option to respond, especially when things go serious, like armed and barricaded or something like that. Again, First Nations policing costs not billed back, again, with the civil litigation, your claims. And then you're looking at the alert teams, the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams. That is an RCMP led and a lot of money funded from the federal government in that regard. And that's you're dealing with your serious organized crime. You're dealing with any of your gang units, a lot of the mid-level, a lot of the drug stuff. Lloydminster, Grand Prairie, Red Deer, like there's places all over at Fort McMurray that are exclusively staffed by RCMP in those areas. And then when you get into the cities, Edmonton, Medicine Hat, Calgary, there'll be mixed teams in there. Next slide. So one of the things that we've often heard and we recognize is rural crime. Rural crime and response to rural crime has been a major issue within the province. We're dealing obviously with a huge logistical issue, and I think if I have the number here, the area served by the RCMP within Alberta is 659,000 kilometers squared. That's a massive, massive area. So when the government decided, okay, we've got a problem here that we have to address and deal with, the government of the time went to the RCMP and said, how do we address this problem? How do we address this? And we came up with the the crime reduction units. So the way the RCMP in Alberta is broken up, you have 4 districts: Western Alberta District, Eastern Alberta, Central Alberta, and Southern Alberta. Each district has its own crime reduction unit. And so the province came to the RCMP, identified this issue, put together the plan. They incorporated more money and attached a few prosecutors and basically targeted these high-risk, prolific offenders. And in that time, we've seen, you can see a 10% reduction in the rural crime, which translated to a 6% on the municipal side. So it's having that effect. When we look at it, ultimately, the best bang for your buck, and we hear it often, especially with the rural crime, is the revolving door justice system, to get into an area where we could keep bad guys in jail, and especially the troublemakers. We would probably see a greater reduction in crime and criminals, and probably a lot more relief on the part of the rural residents in the province. So the scope of the transition study. So this is effectively what the province requested of the PricewaterhouseCoopers report. It was basically to not engage with the municipalities or the citizens or communities or any of the Indigenous people, because they were not looking for that aspect of it. They wanted to, or they stated claim, of course, as you can see, is they wanted the comprehensive analysis, the operational requirements, process steps, and costs of transitioning from the RCMP to a new police service. I read that, and I read the study of the 3 parts of it. It didn't really quite qualify. There are a lot of unknowns and assumptions that go through this thing, and everything that we've taken from and put into this presentation comes from either the RCMP's direct numbers or from the PricewaterhouseCoopers report. And that last paragraph there, where it recommends further consultation be conducted and significant study and analysis needs to be completed to validate any of the assumptions and further refine the cost projections, basically says you need to do more work and more studying on it. And so when we're at this stage, I use shooting. I like to shoot. So when you're shooting long distance, if you're shooting at 100 meters, your margin of error can be small and it doesn't translate very much. But as you go further out, obviously that starts to increase exponentially. So I liken that to when you are planning something, if you don't get this base right and you don't get the foundation in correctly and understand what your numbers and what you're actually facing, you will end up seeing cost projections and errors, problems, etc., really, really expand as you go forward. And Kevin will end up covering off some of this stuff when he speaks of Surrey, because I caught that somebody had mentioned Surrey in there. And you can see when Kevin deals with it, the increase of the unforeseen or unknown costs that are really being downloaded to the taxpayer as things move on. It has a lot of assumptions in it, even on some of the future state study. It speaks to, they want to have agreements with Edmonton City Police and Calgary City Police to further this project. None of that is actually secure, so nobody knows if that's actually going to take place. So it makes it very difficult to understand or provide a real good assessment of what it will look like until you actually have all of these things in place. Next one. Thank you. So the models that we're looking at here, basically it boils down to kind of the costings, and both models proposed by the PricewaterhouseCoopers study are higher cost for the dollars you're spending. So when you're looking at the study, it says basically it should be set up similar to the way the RCMP is currently running it, which of course begs the question, why would we want to replace it at added cost? I think for me, I would look at it and say, okay, where could we possibly improve and maybe or potentially put more money into shoring up some of these things that potentially are identified as shortfalls. The two different models proposed significantly reduce the police staffing levels and increase the costs. Again, Kevin, he's going to cover off more of that money side, and you'll see where it is, but we're just kind of touching on it here. We have, Albertans want decreased response times. They want to, deal with the prolific offenders. None of these studies or this transition study addresses any of those issues. There's no impact on response time. And realistically, if we wanted to improve crime reduction or policing within the province, we need to understand that none of these things operate in a silo. So when you have this money, you're better off investing in some of your support services. So mental health, addictions, crown prosecutors, judges, courts. That's usually where you'll see the biggest impact. I mean, because realistically, you could put 100,000 police officers out on the streets within Alberta, and it won't make a lick of difference if you don't have the supporting justice system structures to address the crime and all of these offenders and problems. So governance and oversight, again, current state, what we're looking at versus the proposed model, more or less same kind of setup. It's the government of Alberta, and if anybody who's ever reviewed or seen the provincial policing agreement, the government has tons of say. The minister has the say in selection of a CO, and a lot of his senior officers and executives. They dictate what it is that they want to focus on. They set policing priorities. They can dictate the coverages and the areas. Basically, they provide the money. So if they want to increase response times and they want to increase police officers or police officer presence or more detachments, they can do so. They just simply need to say, here's the amount of money. We want you to make it so. And then it's up to the commanding officer of K Division, Alberta, to make it happen. And that's where he can go to depot and demand or request additional police officers to fill all of those positions. The priorities are set through the police advisory committees. I know we've had at some of our in-person meetings, I think it was one of the women from the RMA or AM or Alberta Municipal Association. She was a part of it, and she provides policing priorities to the minister, who in turn then provides it to the CO. Everything is within the control of the provincial government, and I think a good example of the proper use of the provincial policing agreement is the creation of the crime reduction units. Problem was identified. Government listened to the people. Minister and the government went to the commanding officer, said, this is the problem, we want it fixed, or we want it addressed, and they made it happen. Takes money and direction, and because ultimately police serve the population, and the police have to understand what the priorities are as listed or identified by the contracting partner. So if you take a small town, for example, and you have kids rolling up and down the street, drag racing or something like that, the mayor or town councilors meet with the detachment commander and basically say, hey, we want this problem addressed. Then it is incumbent upon that commander to listen to the mayor and council and make it happen. So there's a lot of ability to address these issues. So when we're looking at staffing levels, you can see it's outlined here, the current RCMP model, and then you have the two proposed models. It's interesting because the Model A, which has been identified as the cheapest model, basically kind of splits the responsibilities with 1,600 fully trained police officers. So I am assuming that that would be your regular RCMP or a Calgary City Police or Medicine Hat or Edmonton City. So that kind of equivalent. And then they would have 1,500 level twos, and they're identifying it as potentially sheriffs. But in some of the discussions and some of the information that we've received, that may not necessarily be the case. That may be your community policing officer, like a CPO or a bylaw officer. So you are not increasing public safety with Model A in this instance. And even then, you're still at a lower cost for currently, better off with the RCMP current model. When we get into Model B, you can see that they identify, I think it's around 56-ish or 54, 55 additional fully trained officers, and another, additional Alberta sheriffs, but we're still at a higher number policing-wise with the current model. And realistically, if you wanted to increase the number of fully trained officers, the government simply says, I want X amount of members at these areas, and commanding officer, make it happen. And then again, like I said, he contacts depot and they just start taking in some of the recruits. Next one, please. So on the training side of things, we're looking at, you can see what it looks like. So Edmonton City Police, you can see 91 recruits over the last year. Calgary upped it. If you were to look at Alberta Provincial Police, you're going to need potentially 2,500 more police officers, okay? So in the, and I'll explain how this kind of looks. In the study, or the Government of Alberta presentations, what they've stated is they believe that 15% of the currently serving RCMP members within Alberta will flip over to a provincial police service. That may be true. I don't think that's necessarily true if Surrey in BC is any example, because I think we have, I want to say it was like 12 to 14% maybe, or somewhere thereabouts. But we'll use 15% as an easy number. So that means you are still going to be missing about 2,500 police officers. I am not entirely sure where they're going to come from. And part of the issue that we're having, or actually the problem that policing in Canada is having, is that it is increasingly hard to attract people into this profession, which is a shame because I've loved it. And I think my two partners here love it as well. We do not have the ability to bring in, or at least the province wouldn't have that ability to bring that in. We don't know where they would necessarily be trained because there is no training facility. Certainly, Calgary City or Edmonton, their areas would not necessarily be able to support that if they could even secure an agreement to have them trained there. In Canada, there are approximately 68,000 sworn police officers. That's across the country for 38 million people or whatever it is. We cannot bring in enough people into this profession nationwide, let alone into Alberta. And even then, Edmonton and Calgary, I'm sure if anybody who's ever stopped by the police in Calgary or Edmonton, you might notice at times there are some police officers with British accents or Aussie accents. That's because they had to go overseas to try and bring in police officers to fill their ranks. So the idea of a homegrown provincial police force staffed exclusively with people from Alberta is a hard thing to imagine, just because Edmonton City and Calgary City Police have not been able to actually attract those people. And in point of fact, Edmonton is now looking at bringing back their foreign recruitment program and heading over to the UK to try and bring in some of these people. And even with Victoria City Police, Victoria, nice place, they're looking for about 20, I think it is, experienced police officers. If you bring in, if they can find them, that's great, but they can't. They've had to actually offer a $20,000 signing bonus to bring these people in. So when you're looking at a gap within a provincial police force of 2,500 members, that's not just bodies in uniforms. You need to have somebody who's going to solve a murder. You need people who are experienced. You need somebody who understands drug work or working with agents or working with sources. You need people with experience. So it's not just a simple transition. And the study itself, or the PwC report, does nothing to explain how they're going to potentially attract any new recruits. And even with Edmonton, they just recently completed one of their newest training facilities to the tune of about $120 million, and it was 2 years overdue. There's a lot of logistical issues and a lot of things that have not been hammered out and need to be addressed by the government and explain to the taxpayer how they're going to achieve any of these things.
Thanks, Jeff.
Kevin, sorry.
Just to follow up on that last slide there, when Jeff talked about training and recruiting police officers. So the PwC report assumed that about 15% of the current Alberta members would switch over to Alberta Provincial Police Service. I think that 15% is probably fairly liberal, to say the very least. And I'll tell you why. For example, in Surrey, for those of you that don't know, the city of Surrey is currently undergoing a transition from the RCMP towards the municipal police service. They expected a fairly large percentage of members to switch over. That just did not happen. And then some of those that did switch over are actually now wanting to go back to either to the RCMP or their other agency, whichever they came from, whether it's Delta or Vancouver, where the case is. So even if 15% of the current RCMP members switched over to the APPS, that still leaves approximately 2,500 members that need to be police officers that need to be found for a brand new police service. That's difficult, as Jeff pointed out. Recruiting is not an attractive career as it once was, and those bodies are hard to find. So it's just one more question that the government hasn't answered, how they're going to find those bodies. It's concerning, to say the very least. But anyway, we'll move forward to the next slide there now. So if any of you had the opportunity to travel up and down the highways in Alberta here this last summer, you may have seen some of our billboards that we had posted across the province. There's still a couple of them up around Red Deer, around the Innisfil area, that say 160 million reasons to keep the RCMP. Full disclosure, when we had those billboards commissioned, we underestimated what the actual number was. The PwC report properly estimates it a little bit more accurately at $185 million this year. And I say this year because, as Jeff alluded to, the provincial policing agreement guarantees the federal government picks up 30% of the provincial policing costs for the province of Alberta. In 2021, that worked out to $185 million. What does it work out to in 2022? I don't know, 190, 192, 7-8 years from now. Are we 200 million? Probably quite likely. But the point is that under the provincial policing agreement, the deal that the Canada has with the province of Alberta, 30% of the provincial policing costs are picked up by the feds in perpetuity. So 30% each and every year, year after year after year. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're buying a jug of milk at the corner store, or if you're buying a provincial policing service. Having somebody else pick up 30% of the bill is a lot of money, and it's not something to be scoffed at. In the case of policing, we are talking about millions upon millions of dollars, and that's something to be considered. If we as a province move away from the RCMP and towards a provincial policing service, that 30% will be gone, never to return. And you and I, as taxpayers of the province of Alberta, will be left on the hook to pick up that tab, and it should be considered. The provincial government, when the PwC report was released in November, suggested that the provincial government would pick up that extra money and would not be passed, and those costs would not be passed down to municipalities. Well, spoiler alert, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but there is but one tax bucket in the province of Alberta. So whether that $185 million comes off the top line at the government level, or comes off the bottom line when it gets down to the municipalities or the counties, really makes no difference, because it's money that could be spent elsewhere other than on a product that's currently is already being paid by somebody else. So it's something to very, very much consider, and it is a question that the government has not answered yet. Jeff alluded to a couple slides ago. Jeff talked about the two different models that were proposed by the PwC report, Model A and Model B. As he mentioned, Model A was the one that called for approximately half the number of fully trained police officers, and Model B called for just slightly more, a handful more members really, to police the province. However, because that 30% is gone, there is significant extra costs associated to moving to either one of those models. If you look under the current RCMP model, that includes the municipal costs, the provincial costs, the federal costs, and to be fair, we'll include the sheriffs in there. The total cost to Alberta taxpayers in the province is just under $600 million, $595 million each year. If we move to Model A, total cost goes up to $734 million, or a total of can't see the number there, $139 million extra a year. Or Model B, a total of $759 million. Again, a lot more money for either significantly less fully trained officers, or just a handful more. Now, keep in mind what I said on the last slide, that the provincial government has a deal with the feds under the provincial policing agreement, that the feds pick up 30% of the provincial policing tab. If we want more police officers, which is completely under the minister's authority under Article 5 of the provincial policing agreement, he can do that. He calls up the commanding officer and says, Deputy Commissioner Zablocki, I would like X number of members. And he says, okay, no problem. And he dials them up, and under the contract, they have 11 months to produce those members, and those members are produced. So if the province wants that handful of extra members under Model B, which I think is 54 or 56 members, they can do that now with the RCMP as the provincial police service of choice. The big difference is as taxpayers, we only pay 70% of the cost rather than the full 100% that we would if we had a provincial police service. On top of the year after year 30%, the year after year additional costs that would be part of that the province would have to pick up as a result of losing that federal government subsidy. There's also the one-time transition costs. These one-time transition costs are things that things like equipment, real estate, communications, technology, all those sort of things that need to be purchased to start up a new provincial police service. Not a lot different than one-time purchases when you start a new company. Same sort of idea. Now, depending on which model the provincial government wanted to go with, Model A or Model B, the one-time transition costs of Model A are currently estimated at about $166 million, and with Model B at estimated $177 million. I think that's probably a conservative number, and I'll tell you why. Again, looking back at the city of Surrey estimated their one-time transition costs at $19 million. Those transition costs in Surrey have now ballooned to $80 million, and they're 2 years in, and they're nowhere close to even being finished. Now, if you want to do some quick math, that equates to a 400% overrun. If we are even remotely close to that numbers, you can quickly see how the transition costs moving from the RCMP to a provincial police service could easily come to $1 billion. I'm going to ask you this question. I'll just throw it out there and you can answer it yourself. When was the last time that you saw a government project either on time or on budget? I've asked that question to many, many people, and nobody yet has been able to come with an example for me where a government project has been on time or on budget. So you can quickly see how the one-time transition costs could get very, very large very, very quickly. Again, those are costs that would need to be paid for by the taxpayer of Alberta. These are costs that, if we stay with the RCMP, are not needed to be spent. The PwC report also suggests that the transition itself would take about 4 years, 2-year transitional period and 4 years planning. I think that's highly unlikely as well, and I'll tell you why. In 2019, the city of Red Deer hired KPMG to look at transitioning away from the RCMP towards the municipal police service. KPMG, a very reputable company, very good at what they do. They determined two things. One, that it was not financially prudent to do. It was going to cost millions of more dollars each and every year. And for those millions of dollars, the taxpayers of the city of Red Deer were really going to get the same thing, if not less. So from a financial standpoint, it just didn't make sense. What they also determined is that transition, moving from the RCMP to a Red Deer police service or police department, whatever they would call it, was going to take 4 years. So the thought that you could transition an entire province in less than 4 years or 4 years or less is nonsensical, and the facts just don't add up. Make a couple comparisons. City of Red Deer, we're talking about 120,000 people, give or take a little bit, one location, as opposed to a province that polices a area of 659 square kilometers and 113 locations. Obviously, a lot more complicated, and to think that it would be anywhere less than 4 years or 4 years or less is not reasonable, in my opinion. So by now you've probably had a lot of questions, and I've seen some questions in the chat there where, what about this, what about that? And those are all very good questions, and they're questions that haven't been answered by the government or the minister. The minister, when he released the PwC report back in November, suggested that there would be more public consultation. What that public consultation looks like, we don't know. We originally thought people from every walk of life that are able to come to our sessions would be invited to those ministers' meetings. That doesn't appear to have been the case. We're not really sure who's going to be invited to those consultation sessions or not. If you're able to crowbar your way in there, or sneak in somehow, some way or the other, to some of the ministers' sessions, we thought we would provide you some questions to answer, or to ask the minister or their persons from the government at those sessions. And these are some of them. And so, feel free to ask those questions. If in the event that you're not able to register to get into one of those of the government sessions, reach out to your MLA and ask those questions, and hold them to account to provide some answers, because this is your money and these are your risks that you're taking, and not just for the taxpayers now, but this will be for generations and generations that will be paying for this this error if we go down this road. Next steps. Well, the good news is you've already done the first step, which is to join us on one of our either in-person or virtual engagement sessions, and we thank you for doing that. If you log on to our website at KeepAlbertaRCMP.ca, there's lots of more information on there. As well, on our website, you will see a online petition. Feel free to read that, and if you're so inclined, fill it out and sign it. Based on your postal code, the letter will go to the Premier, the Minister, and your MLA, voicing your concerns about the transition to a provincial police service. Next thing, tell your friends, tell your families, and heck, tell people you don't even like. The more people that we can get engaged on the topic and understand the issues, the better, and the better for all of us.